Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing our discussion of sessions, and we're going to learn about how to properly destroy a session. We're going to briefly talk about what the destruction of a session actually implies, what it actually means. We're going to go over a built-in function to PHP that's used to basically destroy session data called session_destroy. And then we're going to talk about some additional steps that you need to do in addition to calling this session destroy method to effectively basically end or delete or destroy a session. That's going to involve manually deleting all of the session data, manually deleting session cookies. Then we're just going to go over a review of all of the steps that are involved in successfully ending a session. And then we're going to briefly talk about the topic of garbage collection, which talks about what happens if a session is not successfully ended, what happens to that session data. So basically, when either a client or a server determines that a session is over, for example, if a client wants to log out or a server decides that the user hasn't had any activity in a certain amount of time, it can end that session, and that's called destroying the session. Basically, what destroying the session does is it undoes the two things that a session does. Namely, it cuts the link between any previous and any future HTTP transactions, as that's part of what a session does, is it links multiple requests together so that they're considered part of the same session between two parties over a specific period of time. And it also gets rid of any of that session data associated with the particular session, because that data is transient data, and when the session ends, it's no longer needed. So destroying a session is effectively basically get rid of that data. So in PHP, for example, what that means is actually getting rid of that session data file in the temp directory on the server, freeing up those resources, that disk space, to be used for other sessions. So PHP provides the session_destroy method that is used to destroy a session. And basically what it does is it ensures that any session data stored on a server, stored on the server, will be deleted. So all of those session files that we had looked at in previous lessons in the temp directory, it was like sesh underscore and then the unique ID or the unique session ID. Session destroy, when it's called, it basically deletes that session file, so that data is no longer accessible. One thing to note about the session destroy method is that in order for you to call it, it actually has to have in order to call it in a script, it actually already has to have or know about an initialized session, which means that indirectly means that in order to call session destroy, you actually have to call session start on that script before you do it. And this is a little counterintuitive because you think, okay, I'm destroying the session, why do I need to start it? But that's part of the process. So in any script where you call session destroy, you need to, before you call that method, you also need to call session start. So let's take a look at what we've done, what we've previously been doing or what session destroy actually does. We have a script called set session var, and this is similar to what we used in our last lecture. Basically what it does is it starts a session and it sets a username session variable, sets it equal to John Smith or J Smith, and then it outputs a link to get_session_var.php, which is a page that allows us to basically access that session variable. So because it accesses session variables, it needs access to the session superglobal. In order to get that, it has to call session start. So it's going to call session start, which is going to read that, see the cookie that the client provided with the session ID, and then it's going to use that to load the session superglobal. Basically here we've done a little bit of error checking to make sure that the session is started, or that this username session variable does exist when the user comes to this page. So basically it's just checking if that username variable, session variable is set, go ahead and set this username variable to the value of that session variable. And if not, we're going to store it to we're going to set it to a string that's an italicized string, non-existent, which means that it doesn't exist. Then what we do in the body of our HTML is we simply are outputting the name of that particular username that is part of the session, assuming that it exists. We also output a link that says, that's a new link that says to destroy the session. It's going to go to destroy session.php, What that does is it's going to call our session destroy method. Now, as mentioned, it also, in order to call session destroy, you have to call session start previously. So it calls session start and then calls session destroy. And then the body will attempt to output this session variable username if it is still valid. And it has the same ternary operation up here that basically tests for the existence of that username variable and will set username equal to that value if it has been set. And the reason why I've included this here, you might wonder, why am I including that in a statement that's destroying the session? And that's to show you sort of the incomplete nature of what session destroy actually does. So, for example, this is our temporary directory. I'm going to delete all of our current session data files that we have in there. If we go to, go ahead and make sure that any session cookies are deleted. And then if we go to example 1 and we go to set session var, we can see that we've been set a cookie, a session cookie that starts with R4GLA. If we go and look at our temporary directory that stores our session data files, we can see a data file that corresponds to R4GLA. Basically, the script is going to set that username variable. Again, if we look at it, session variable is going to set it to jsmith. So when we click on next page, which is going to go to get session variable, we can see that we're able to output and access this jsmith session variable that was set. Again, we can see here that we have our R4GLA cookie that was sent from the client to the server so that it knows that it's continuing this R4GLA session and therefore has access to that session variable that was set as part of that session. Now when we click on, and if we look here, we can still see that this session file exists. Now when we click on destroy session, we're going to notice a couple things. First of all, we can see that the temporary file or the session data file no longer exists because session destroy does that. However, we can see that we're still able to output this jsmith session variable, or the username session variable. If we go back and look at destroy session, we can see that even though we've called session destroy, we still have access to this session variable. And the reason for that is that when session destroy is called, it doesn't destroy that session data file until after the script is finished running. So because of that, the information stored in that session data file, which has been loaded into session, is still available for the rest of this script. That's why we're able to access that down here. And that's one of the issues that we're going to talk about destroying a session, is that you want to manually destroy any session data that you already have so that this can't happen, because in a way it doesn't make sense that you're destroying a session, but yet down here you're able to access that session information. One thing to note is if we actually go ahead and refresh that page, what's going to happen is if we look back at here, when we start the session, it's still going to have that session cookie. It's going to try to load data for that particular session, but since that data file has been destroyed, it's not going to be able to load it, and so this session username, the username session variable is not going to exist, and so we're going to not going to be able to output anything. So if we go ahead and refresh the page, we can see that it shows non-existent. So it shows that it actually did delete that data file, but when that script is immediately run, those session variables are still available. So to sort of counteract part of that imperfection of session destroy, not necessarily an imperfection, but sort of intuitively when you think about, you think if you call a function session destroy, it's going to completely end the session, but that's not necessarily the case. As mentioned, one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't delete the session data immediately, so it's still accessible in the rest of the script. So what we need to do is explicitly delete any session data so that the future portions of that script will no longer have access to that data. And we can do that, as we learned about deleting session variables, we can do that using the unset method. So actually, if we go and take a look at example 2, which has the same exact set session var script and get session var script. However, its destroy session var script is different in that now it actually unsets this session variable. So whereas in our last example, we actually tested for the existence of the variable and then set the variable username to that session variable if it did exist, here we're explicitly unsetting, or deleting this session variable. Then we call session destroy. Now because we've called this unset method, when we go down here to actually try and output the session variable username again, we're going to see that we're not going to be able to do that because we've unset that variable. So we've eliminated one of the problems with session destroy is that we've now made that session variable inaccessible to the rest of the script. So we basically have a test down here that tests to see if that username session variable exists. If it doesn't, it's going to say it's destroyed. And if it's not, it's going to output it. And assuming that everything works, we actually should never reach this else statement because we're actually unsetting the session variable up here. So if we go and look at this new example, clear our session cookies, go to set session var. It's going to start our new session. AM1J67 is the beginning of that session ID. If you look at our temporary directory, we have that A1J67. Now we go to next page, we're going to have access to that session variable username, so we're able to output it. Now when we go to destroy session, it's going to output a message, session destroyed. And additionally, in our temporary directory, we no longer have that, I don't remember what the exact name of that session ID was, but we no longer have that session data file anymore because session destroyed that after the script ended. But as you can see now, the session destroyed method gets output, or that session destroyed message gets output because we can see down here that that session variable username is no longer available. Another way, if we actually go back and look at our slide, another way to basically delete session variables, instead of going through and individually unsetting each variable, you can actually just set the session superglobal array equal to the empty array, which is essentially going to erase any key value pairs that it had. So it's basically going to reduce any, delete any session variables that you have already created in that session. And in general, that's sort of the preferred method, and for the main reason being that it's easier to do, and you don't have to remember every single session variable that you may have set. So we actually can go and update our script. Instead of calling unset on username, we can just set session equal to an empty array. And then just to confirm that this works, if we go back and delete our session cookie and we run everything again, create a new session, v1hnaq is our session file. We're able to output that session variable. Now our session it's showing that it was successfully destroyed, so that effectively deleted that variable, and we no longer have that session file, which was v1hnaq. If you look back, it's been deleted. So we've been able to delete all of our session data, and we've been able to destroy the session file. Now that we've done that, there's still one more part of the process that we need to do. We've been able to delete our session data, which is part of destroying a session. But the thing we haven't done is we haven't been able to eliminate the connection between future HTTP requests and previous ones. And that's what a session does, is it links multiple requests together. The reason that they're still linked together is because the session destroy method doesn't actually destroy that session cookie. So every time we continue to make requests to that website, our browser, unless that cookie is expired, it's still going to send that session cookie back to the browser, and so back to the web server. And so as far as our web server is concerned, it's still part of the same session, and it's going to link those things together. So session destroy actually doesn't destroy the session in that sense either, and that it doesn't cut that link between previous and future HTTP transactions. For example, we've destroyed our session. This is example 2 again. We've destroyed our session, but if we were to go back, and we can see that our session was named, it begins with v1hn. That's the name of our session ID. Well, if we actually go back and try to start a new session again, set session var, what we can actually see is that no cookie was set, and we've actually continued to pass vh1na, that cookie, to the server. That's basically saying it's still part of the same session, and that's a problem because Well, it looks like actually when it created it, it recreated the session file. But what's going to happen is that would be a problem because the reason it recreated it is because this set session var script, what it actually does is it goes ahead and if a session's already created, it goes ahead and creates that session variable. So it's going to go ahead and recreate that session data file. Maybe what I was trying to get at, a better example would be if we go and destroy the session, we can see that we still have this cookie that we're being passed. If we look at temp directory, our data file has been destroyed. And so basically, when we refresh this page, we're still passing along that same cookie, except no session data exists for that particular file. So in order to basically sever all ties between past and future HTTP transactions, we must explicitly delete that session cookie. And we do that using the setCookie method. We know that we can delete cookies by setting a cookie setting a cookie with the same name of the cookie we want to delete with an expiration date that's in the past. And there are two built-in functions to PHP that can help with destroying a session cookie. One is called session name, which is going to return the name of sessions, which, as we know, is also the name of session cookies, and by default that's PHP seshID. And we use that method basically to load the name of the cookie that we're trying to destroy, because maybe in different scenarios this is a configurable option, so it could change. Maybe somebody just instead decided to have session name equal to just SID. So that's going to allow us to load the appropriate name of the cookie to destroy. Then there's a method called session get cookie params, which allows us to get parameters of the cookie such as its domain and path, because also when we are deleting a cookie, we have to know the domain and the path for that particular cookie. So we need to know the name of the cookie and then domain and path in order to successfully delete it by setting its time into the past. So in our new version, version 3, set session var and get session var are the same. However, in our destroy session, it's been updated. We start the session, as we know that we need to do. We've deleted any session data, and now we're going to delete the session cookie. So what we basically do is we load the parameters for the particular session cookie using this session get cookie params method. And then what we do is we make short variables for all of the parameters of the cookie that we're going to be deleting. We load the name of the cookie, which we use the session name method to do. We're going to set the expiration of the cookie to expire an hour in the past, so that's going to effectively delete it. We load the path of the cookie to make sure that when we call the setCookie method, we're deleting the cookie and have the path match so that it actually deletes the cookie. And then we also are getting the domain so that the domain of the cookie we're deleting is going to match so that we'll be able to delete it. Then we simply call the setCookie method or function with the name of the cookie, its path and its domain that we were able to extract from by calling this session get cookie params method. And then we're also going to set the expires, which is going to set it to expire in the past. So when that gets called, that set cookie header is going to get sent. The cookie is going to be destroyed. Then we're also going to call session destroy, which is going to delete the data on the server after the script is ended. And again, if we try to output the username session variable, we're not going to be able to do that because it has been unset up here when we deleted all the session data by setting session equal to array. So now if we go and look at our new version, version 3, or example 3, delete our any session cookies. We call set session var. So it's been assigned the ID in setCookie 58K7. So remember that's the start of our session ID. When we go to get session var, we're able to output the username method. And just to refresh my memory, that 58K7 is the beginning of our session ID. If we look in our temp directory, we can see we have a 58K7 data file. Now when we click on, also one other thing to note is that if we look at our cookies currently, we have a 587K session cookie. So note that. Now when we click on Destroy Session, it's going to do those three things. It's going to delete all our session data so that we're not able to output that username variable. It's going to delete the session cookie, and if we look at our header, HTTP header, we can see that it set the cookie, it basically deleted the cookie. It set PHP sessid equal to deleted, and it set the cookie to expire in the past. So we've deleted the session cookie, and then if we look at our temp directory, we've also deleted that session data file. It was 58K7, and if we look back, that file no longer exists. So now we've essentially effectively ended our session. We've deleted all the session data so it's not available in the rest of the script. We've deleted the session cookie so that any future HTTP requests aren't linked to the session that we've just ended. And then we've also gone ahead and deleted any session data on the server associated with that session so that those server resources are available for future sessions. And this is just a recap of the steps that you need to properly destroy a session. First off, you need to call session start, because that's going to give you, well, first of all, you need to call that before you can call session destroy. And it's also going to give you access to the session superglobal, which is going to allow you to perform step 2, which is to explicitly just delete any session data stored in session. And the easiest way to do that is just to set it to the empty array. We've explicitly deleted the session cookie by calling the setCookie method, setCookie function, and setting the cookie, the session cookie to expire in the past, which will effectively delete it. And then we've destroyed the session data on the server by calling the session destroy method. So let's say that our session is not properly ended. Let's say we actually did part of it. We've unset all of our session variables and we've deleted our session cookie, but we forget to call session destroy. Well, what that's going to do is that means that that's going to leave our particular session data file on the server. And what actually happens is in PHP, regardless of the expiration of a particular session's cookie, a session's data file has a particular lifetime associated with it. And it's something that you configure with the session.gc_max lifetime configuration directive, which is basically the number of seconds until a session data file is seen as garbage. So even if you have a cookie that a user is passing back and forth to the server that has a PHP session ID for a session that it was a part of, if this max lifetime has been reached for a particular session data file, then PHP may go ahead and delete that file, and so you don't have access to it. So it's another way of sort of managing sessions, and basically part of the reason for that is to make sure that your temporary directory doesn't get filled up with all these sessions for sessions that were never effectively ended by calling session destroy. Basically, after this set amount of time, PHP considers a session data file to be garbage, and PHP basically has what's known as a garbage collector process, and that's a term used in programming to basically free up memory. And what it does is it periodically runs, and it will remove any session data files that have been marked as garbage. And so what that does is it basically allows you to allows any session data files for sessions that were over or have gone on for too long and may not have been effectively destroyed to basically to keep from using up all of your server resources. There's two other configuration directives, session.gc_probability, session.gc_divisor, and they're basically, these are advanced configuration directives. In fact, all of these are, that we're not really going to get into the details of, but basically they sort of describe how long it takes till a file gets marked as garbage, and then also these two actually describe what are the chances that that file is actually going to get deleted at the end of its lifetime, because it may actually continue to last for a little longer than its lifetime, depending on how these are set. But they're all in the name of basically deleting any session data files that have gone on for sessions that no longer exist. So for example, if we go back to our session destroy session script in our last example, let's say we delete our session cookie, but we leave out the session destroy method. If we go back and rerun this example, let's delete any session cookies. we set the session var and we view it. And we can see that we've created a session that starts with session ID NOUHA. If we go and look at our temp file, our temp directory, we can see a session data file NOUHA. Now when we call destroy session, we can see that our cookie has been deleted by looking at the set cookie method. So our session cookie no longer exists. So our basically our HTTP requests are no longer linked together. However, if we look back at our temp directory, we can see that this NOUHA session data file still exists because we didn't call session destroy, and that's the purpose of session destroy. So what that means is that eventually there's a default settings in php.ini that are going to know when that file is considered garbage, and I think the default is like 24 minutes or something like that. And what it's going to do is it's going to check in 24 minutes, and if that file still exists, it'll go ahead and delete it, and that basically eliminates the problem where all your server memory would get, or hard disk space would get used up by sessions that were never properly destroyed. So even if you do just delete that cookie, if you don't call session destroy, that data file isn't going to be deleted. And so that just talks about how that session data files also have a limited lifetime as well. So in general, though, it shouldn't be something you should worry about if you always call session destroy when appropriate when destroying a session. So for the homework challenge, I basically want you to extend the homework challenge solution you made for lesson 25. And basically, we're going to be adding a logout script, or a logout script to our application that's essentially going to destroy a user's session. We're going to say, okay, when you've logged out, your session is over. So for example, if you were at a website where you go and you log in, it might say your name at the top of each page, and then when you log out, it no longer does. That's effectively sort of ending your session. So we're going to mimic that in our application by creating a script called logout.php, and we're going to add a link to logout.php on the members only page, so that when we're viewing our members only page, we can click on that and it'll allow us to log out. And basically, in logout.php, at the top of the script, I want you to perform the 4 steps that are needed to properly destroy a session, which is, again, call session start, delete all the session variables, delete the session cookie, and then call session destroy. Then, if the session is successfully destroyed, which it should be, assuming all these methods have been followed, output a message that the user has been successfully logged out, and then provide him or her a link back to login.html. If it wasn't successfully logged out, output an error message. And again, assuming that this is done right, you shouldn't have to output that error message. The way that you can test that a user is logged out is by verifying that the username session variable that the user set on login.html is no longer set. And again, that's how we checked to see if a user was logged in before, was by just testing if the username session variable was set. And so you'll want to employ that test again. And what you can do is I want you to test your completed solution by logging into the site, going to the members only page, and then clicking on the logout link. When you're on that logout page, one thing I want you to note is actually note the SID of your session cookie by using Firebug. You can look at the cookie header and see what your session ID is, and then click on the link back to login.html. Now when you go back to login.html, I want you to log back into the site and verify that you'll see that a new session cookie with a different SID has been set, and you'll see a set cookie header in Firebug. And so basically that's going to show you is that you've successfully destroyed your session and that you've deleted your session cookie. So now that when you log in again and that session start method is called, a new cookie is generated. Also verify that the session data file associated with your old SID that you looked at on logout.php has been erased, and then you also see that a new session data file matching your new session ID has been created. One note as far as testing goes is one thing that's helpful in testing is to make sure that you delete any localhost cookies stored by Firefox before testing your solution, so that you don't run into problems where you're not actually starting a new session when you first log into your website. And the way, again, to do that is if you go to Firefox and then Options, if you click on the Privacy tab, remove individual cookies, and then you can search for any localhost cookies. And here there are none, but you would just select them and click to remove them. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com and look forward to seeing you next time.